All right, this next story, I have to tell you, it's tremendously sad. I think it provides, though, yet another example of how the left's extreme push of gender ideology can capture vulnerable children who then all too often end up becoming casualties. Earlier this year in Oklahoma, a 16-year-old female student, Dagny Benedict, she went by the name Nex, and she identified as non-binary. She died the day after there was an altercation with classmates in the girls' bathroom at school. Well, probably not surprisingly, the left, including President Biden, people like Elizabeth Warren, Nancy Pelosi, and many others, they seized on this girl's death to push their agenda. In fact, the New Republic even blamed her death on Republicans on the Oklahoma State Legislature with the headline, and get this headline, this is just so vicious. Oklahoma Republicans passed a bathroom bill, now a trans kid is dead. What a headline. Well, last month, the Oklahoma Medical Examiner's report was released. It cited suicide as the cause of this student's death. More recently, an investigation into court reports revealed that this young girl was also sexually abused by her own father beginning when she was 9 years old, and it lasted for a period of some 2 years. So not only does this whole reality truth, not only does this not fit the left's narrative of Republican bigots driving a teenager to suicide, this tragic story demonstrates how psychological trauma and mental health comorbidities can lead to gender confusion. It's a serious issue. Joining me now to help us understand all of this is Dr. Jennifer Bauwens. She's the director of the Center for Family Studies here at the Family Research Council. Prior to her work, by the way, at FRC, Dr. Bauwens worked as a clinician and researcher addressing the effects of psychological drama. As a researcher, she's studied things like the traumatic effect of events like 9/11. Dr. Bauwens, welcome back to Washington Watch. Great to see you.
Good to be back with you, Jody.
All right, there is a lot to unpack in this deeply sad story. What happened to this young girl, beginning when she's just 9 years old, it's sad. It ought to make anyone angry. Give us your thoughts as the truth about this young girl comes out.
Yeah, you know, when I first saw the medical examiner, what they reported, I thought to myself, this sounds like a trauma victim story. And it's so sad to think that, you know, here we have another situation that mirrors so many stories that we hear in this line of work and in the clinical setting as well, much like our own Walt Heyer's story. And in this case, the medical examiner said about this young woman that she was diagnosed with bipolar, she had anxiety, depression, and she was self-harming and using substances like marijuana. She was using them chronically. These are all things that point to someone with a trauma history, even if we didn't have the court documents released and we were just going based off of this knowledge. Because what happens is trauma victims are often given a lot of different diagnoses, and this girl, you know, bipolar, depression, anxiety, all of these things can actually be symptoms of someone who's gone through trauma and childhood sexual abuse. So, you know, definitely the self-harming behaviors, these are things that somebody who was clear-headed and looking for these kinds of signs would detect that and say, you know, let's investigate this. Let's see what's going on with her. Does she need help to sort through these traumas? But instead, you know, we have not only has this girl been abused and mistreated in her lifetime, but now in her own death, she's been abused and mistreated by a political agenda. And that is just so disheartening to see someone's deep pain and abuse be used for the purposes of advancing an agenda that's not helpful, not helpful in the least.
That is so true. You know, it is a horrible story what happened to this young girl just in and of itself. But on a different level, it is also angering and maddening what you just shared, how the left jumps on this whole story for the purpose of pushing a radical, harmful left-wing agenda, accusing Republicans really of having blood on their hands for passing laws to try to actually prevent this kind of thing. But now that the facts have come to light on all of this, have any of them apologized? Have any of them come out and said, oh, we were wrong to jump to conclusions about this? None that I've heard of. I imagine that's the same with you.
Yeah, none that I've heard of. And the reason, I think, in part for that is the facts are so lacking on their side. The science is so lacking, and the reports are increasing of true psychological harm that these procedures, the transgender procedures, impose on kids. And so the only narrative that they really have is this idea of, kids are being bullied, which, by the way, kids who've been traumatized and gone through childhood traumas are often bullied because they're going through things that are so different than their peers who aren't being abused. So when you see a kid being bullied, that's also a warning sign. Do I need to find out what's going on in the home or in this kid's social setting? It's not always the case, but it is often the case that kids who have major childhood disruptions can be bullied. So, here we have people who aren't willing to look at root issues, and they're just pushing an agenda and a narrative the best they can. And here was a situation that seemed like it could be fully rooted only in the idea that this young girl was bullied for a trans identity, and there was so much more going on here. And we're not getting any apologies. We're not getting any retractions. And also, how is that helpful to demonize one side? To say that Republicans are responsible for the deaths of a young person, when our goal and our heart motivation is really to protect kids from procedures that are not scientific. It just doesn't move the discourse at all.
No, it doesn't. In fact, you brought up so many things there. My mind is going 1,000 different directions on different questions and paths that we could run down. But let me jump on this one that you said a few moments ago, that all these procedures are so harmful to children. All right, we know that. Even Europe now is recognizing this, and they're reversing course on so much of this stuff. And yet we continue pushing forward, push, harming these children and seeing the outcomes, the tragic outcomes such as this. One of the questions, Dr. Bauwens, that people ask me over and over and over is the question, why? Why in the world are these people, the political left, why are they pushing policies that are so harmful to children? What is behind it? Can you help us? Can you explain perhaps the motive of those that are pushing gender ideology and the LGBT agenda and so forth on our children?
Yeah, let's just take it back for a minute, back to the early 1900s. You have a guy named Magnus Hirschfeld, and he started an organization about, in the name is the Sexual Sciences and Eugenics, okay? So his organization and his work influenced Harry Benjamin, who is the founder of the W path, which if you've seen any of our latest programs, you've seen us talk about the W path leaks, and this organization created the standards of care, supposedly, so standards of care for transgender quote unquote medicine. And keep in mind, they're friends and they're hanging out with people like Margaret Sanger, who is the founder of Planned Parenthood, right? So this is in the backdrop, and key into the word eugenics. What's eugenics about? You're playing God. You're playing God with people and human beings. So at one level, you have at the root of an ideology this idea that I can create my own world, my own reality. Then you fast forward and you have people like J.B. Pritzker who have spent millions upon millions of dollars, and other folks as well. I'm just picking out one person who has been influential in funding education and medical organizations, who then, the role of education, at least in our country, you look at the Ivies, was to propagate the gospel. It was to raise up missionaries, and that mission still exists. Originally, right? Mm-hmm. But that mission still exists. And so there is a negative evangelistic component to their calling. And so they have released that doctrine on many students and around the world. And so, you have spiritual and ideological motivations. You have money. You have people who are themselves probably abused and finding their identity in an ideology like this. Which by the way, we have to keep that in mind. What happened to somebody who could deny the existence of their biological reality? What's going on in the heart of a person? So we have to pray for them as well, even as we, push forward and disallow them to have influence over our children. So there are a lot of factors here, and certainly looking back at the root system will give us a clue about what the purpose is in transing our kids and the God complex.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating, Dr. Bauwens, what you come up at. And what really hit me is how you took the original purposes of these schools, the Ivy schools, virtually all of them that I've looked at and researched, they were birthed to advance the gospel. And now that spiritual component and mission has been twisted to where now they are pushing their own gospel, the destruction of life, and all this absolute upside down, backwards, twisted truth in the lives of people. So there's and I want to get your reaction to this. There's the economic component. No doubt there's a lot of money in this. There's all these root causes you bring up. But there is the spiritual aspect pushing all this forward. Can you take us down that path a little bit further?
Yeah. And one thing that this ideology does is it often finds its way into vulnerable people and children. Who's most vulnerable? Children. Who's even more vulnerable? Children who've been broken in some way, who've been wounded in some way. And so this ideology, it further promotes a disconnection from that child's true identity and to who God has truly created them to be. And that's, I think that the wonderful thing about where we're at in this day and age, it truly is an incredible day. I think God has given us an invitation with this generation to be like Mary, the Mary who broke her alabaster box over Jesus, and it was a year's wage, and she broke that over Jesus. And who was she? She was a very sexually broken person. I imagine she didn't have much identity and really self-worth. But she gave one of the most extravagant acts of worship over Jesus and Jesus himself said what she did will be remembered for all time. And so think that we have a generation that is very sexually broken, very broken in their identity, and they could be the very next Mary of the alabaster box who offers Jesus such extravagant worship and becomes that sweet aroma to him. And that's a really exciting thought, and that we as the church could be ready to steward such a generation and also help raise them up into that calling.
So true, and that is the mantle that we have, and that is what we offer. And that woman you mentioned, her life was transformed. And she left that life of confusion and immorality, and she was transformed by an encounter with Christ. And that is the same answer that we have today, not only for these children, but for our entire generation. Dr. Jennifer Bauwens, always an honor to speak with you. Thanks for unfolding this sad story to us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Jody.